Greetings, seekers of truth. Today we are going to dive into a world of discoveries that can completely overturn your perception of reality. Since childhood, we have been led to believe in linear progress, the idea that humanity moves from a primitive state to the heights of civilization, inventing increasingly complex and perfect devices. We are told that we live in an era of unprecedented technological flourishing. But what if this is a grand illusion? What if the facts point to the exact opposite process? A total degradation of technology, architecture, and engineering thought. We are used to thinking of the past as a time of simple solutions, but the artifacts we will discuss today suggest that our ancestors possessed knowledge that we cannot even replicate today, let alone surpass. Before we begin this immersion into forbidden history and attempt to assemble the puzzle of lost greatness, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. This will help you keep track of us in the endless flow of information and stay updated on discoveries that textbooks prefer to stay silent about. Our investigation begins with what seems like ordinary numismatics, but upon closer inspection, these metal discs cause bewilderment. There are coin collections dating from completely different eras, from the 17th to the 20th century, with images that defy logical explanation from the perspective of official history. Imagine an old coin stamped with the date 1656. There are Latin inscriptions and a classic minting style, but in the center of the composition, among the clouds, you can clearly see an object that any modern person would unmistakably identify as a flying saucer. This is not an allegory or a random play of shadows on the metal, but a clearly drawn disc-shaped structure hovering in the heavens. But the most amazing thing lies in the details of the scene. These coins often depict not just flight, but a real confrontation. Objects resembling spears, arrows, or perhaps stylized lightning bolts are flying from the clouds toward the unidentified flying object. It looks like a chronicle of a forgotten war, where the primitive weapons of one side clash with the high technologies of another. Some researchers see this as confirmation of paleo-contact theories or ancient wars described in epics. Even more questions are raised by coins from a later period, for example, marked with the 1930s and the word liberty. They also feature images of flying machines hovering above the ground. Moreover, the profiles of the beings minted on the obverse of such coins sometimes have little in common with human anatomy. Strange skull proportions, the absence of a familiar nose, and other facial features. This brings to mind ancient Indian Vedas and other sacred scriptures, which state directly that various forms of life, from five-headed beings to reptilians, inhabit neighboring lands. Perhaps our ancestors were not fantasizing, but documenting reality? Could these coins be evidence of active trade and cultural exchange with representatives of other civilizations or neighboring lands that we have forgotten or that have been hidden from us? If we assume that these artifacts are genuine and not a skillful hoax, then a picture of the world opens up where the sky was furrowed by vimanas and disc-shaped craft, and contact with other intelligence was a commonplace event, imprinted even on small change. This seems like science fiction, but only until we look at more down-to-earth things. After all, if the thought of flying saucers on money seems too radical to you, just wait. The things people used to move around ordinary streets just 100 years ago are no less shocking. It turns out that what is sold to us today as futuristic transport is merely the forgotten technology of our great-grandfathers, which we are struggling to restore. When we hear the word futurology, our imagination paints pictures of a distant tomorrow, shining cities, and transport that defies the laws of gravity. We are taught that every new generation of gadgets is a giant leap forward, while our great-grandfathers lived in a world of steam and horse-drawn power, never dreaming of high speeds or personal comfort. However, if we cast aside school textbooks and turn to archival chronicles, it becomes obvious that the so-called innovations of the 21st century are nothing more than well-forgotten and sometimes intentionally hidden blueprints from a century ago. We are not reinventing the wheel, we are simply taking it out of the dusty closet of history, wiping off the cobwebs, and slapping a bright, new label on it. The brightest example of such technological self-plagiarism is the concept of one-wheeled transport. In pop culture, for instance in the third Men in Black movie, we are shown stylish motorcycles as an attribute of retro-futurism or an alternate reality. The viewer looks at the screen and thinks, wow, what a bold imagination the screenwriters have. But reality is much more prosaic, and at the same time, more amazing. Back in the 1930s, and according to some data even earlier, such one-wheeled machines didn't just exist on paper, they were actually driving on the roads of Paris and the testing grounds of the Soviet Union. Engineers of the past created stable, high-speed motorcycles in which the driver sat comfortably inside. These were not fragile prototypes, but fully fledged vehicles capable of reaching decent speeds. But for some reason, we are told that these are technologies of the future that we might reach someday, even though, in fact, we have simply lost the engineering boldness of our ancestors. The situation becomes even more absurd when it comes to the main trend of modern megacities: electric scooters. Today's marketers present them as salvation from traffic jams, as a symbol of ecological consciousness and new mobility. They tell us, look how far progress has come. Now you don't need a car, just step on the platform and go. But let's be honest, this progress is at least a century late. Already in the early 20th century, the streets of major cities were filled with people on motorized scooters. And these weren't just toys for rich idlers. This transport was actively used by government services. Imagine a postman or courier in the 1910s. He didn't beat his feet bloody swinging a heavy bag. He calmly stood on an electric or gasoline scooter and delivered correspondence, saving energy and time. Office clerks, dressed in strict suits and bowler hats, got to work on personal compact vehicles which they parked right at the entrance to their offices. Moreover, there were models for ladies and even special stands for children so that nannies could take walks in comfort. That is, the infrastructure and mentality of people 100 years ago were already fully ready for what we call micro-mobility today. We end up with a paradoxical situation. From TV screens and monitors, we are told about giant strides of development, about how technology makes our lives easier, but in fact, we are only returning to the level of everyday comfort that was available to our great-grandmothers and great-grandfathers. They were already living in our eco-friendly tomorrow until, somewhere in the mid-20th century, humanity took a turn toward gigantomania and burning hydrocarbons, forgetting the elegant solutions of the past. We are not developing, we are recovering our memory. But if personal transport was so advanced and accessible, what was happening with the environment in which these people lived? After all, the level of technology in one sphere must inevitably be reflected in others. And here, another disappointment in modernity awaits us. It is enough to simply look at the architectural details of that era to understand. Degradation has touched not only engineering thought, but also the sense of beauty. Why does an ordinary cast iron fence from the 19th century look more complex and technological than modern skyscrapers? Why is what used to be the standard for mass construction now considered an unattainable masterpiece of art? The answers to these questions will make you look at the buildings you pass every day in a new way. If you walk through the historic center of any large city and look carefully around, you can notice a strange pattern that does not fit into the official version of technological progress. We see majestic buildings of the 18th and 19th centuries, decorated with complex molding, statues, and bas-reliefs, and next to them, dull, modern concrete boxes. This contrast is so striking that the question involuntarily arises: are we really developing? Or are we a civilization that has lost the secrets of our ancestors' craftsmanship? Let's pay attention to such a seemingly banal thing as metal fences and gates. Items from the 19th century amaze the imagination with their detail. These are true works of art. Ornate patterns, floral ornaments, complex geometric shapes made by artistic forging or casting. Metal seemed to be like plasticine in the hands of past masters, and the connecting seams are so neat that they are almost impossible to find. Every detail, every curl speaks of the highest level of material processing and aesthetic taste. Now let's compare this with what the 21st century offers us. Modern fences are often just a set of rebar or profile pipes welded together. Rough welding seams, primitive geometry, a complete lack of artistic value. We are told that this is a question of economic feasibility. They say labor used to be cheap, and there was plenty of time. But wait, in the era of robotics, laser cutting, and 3D modeling, has creating a beautiful thing really become harder and more expensive than in times when, according to the official version, everything was done by hand with a hammer and anvil? This sounds illogical, to say the least. Rather, one gets the impression that we have simply forgotten how to work with matter the way they did before. The same degradation can be traced in residential construction. It is enough to look at apartment buildings or even ordinary residential buildings of the century before last. These are not king's palaces. This is mass housing for citizens. But look at these facades. Caryatids supporting balconies, lion heads above windows, complex cornices and pilasters. The architecture breathed greatness and harmony. They built for centuries. Brick walls reached a meter in thickness, providing ideal sound insulation and heat retention. Today's standard is faceless multi-story anthills clad in cheap porcelain stoneware, or worse, simply plastered over insulation. The lifespan of such houses is 50 to 70 years, after which they begin to crumble. Where has the desire for beauty gone? We are told about savings again, but for some reason in the backward past, there were enough resources to turn every house into a masterpiece, while in the wealthy present, we build only utilitarian barracks of increased height. There is also a common myth that, despite the beautiful facade, the everyday life of people in the past was terrible and devoid of amenities. Allegedly, they froze in their stone sacks without modern communications. However, during the restoration of ancient buildings, engineers find amazing things. Many houses had well-thought-out central heating systems that worked more efficiently than modern ones. In St. Petersburg, for example, you can find unique radiators that had built-in ovens. These were a kind of microwave of the 19th century. Residents could put food there, and due to the heat of the heating system, the food remained hot or was reheated. Also, lead water pipes and complex ventilation systems are discovered in the walls, which worked without electric fans, solely due to the competent engineering of airflows. All this indicates that comfort technologies were developed at a very high level. They were simply different, more reliable, and autonomous. We have replaced quality with quantity, and durability with disposability. We admire old buildings, take photos in front of them, but we do not even imagine the real scale of engineering thought hidden behind these walls. And if architecture makes us doubt progress, then one simple attraction from 100 years ago will finally destroy the myth of our technical superiority. Modern machinery looks like a pathetic toy in comparison. We are used to measuring progress in megahertz, pixels, and gigabytes, but when it comes to the physical world, steel, mass, and the ability to move huge weights, modernity suffers a crushing defeat in the battle with history. We are often told that engineers in the past acted blindly, without powerful computers to calculate loads, and therefore their structures were primitive. However, dry numbers and facts paint a completely different picture. They show that 100 years ago, humanity possessed industrial capacities and engineering audacity that seem lost forever today. Not to be unfounded, let's turn to a specific example that leaves no stone unturned in the myth of continuous development. Let's transport ourselves to Chicago. In this American city, at different times, two iconic attractions were built: Ferris wheels. One was erected in 1893 for the World's Fair, and the other, a modern one, appeared in 1995 on Navy Pier. It would seem that in the 100 years separating these two events, technology should have made a quantum leap. We expect to see a structure in the late 20th century that is higher, more powerful, faster, and more spacious. But reality is shocking. The Ferris wheel of the 1893 model, created by engineer George Ferris, was a real titan. Its height was over 80 meters, but the main thing was its carrying capacity. There were 36 cabins attached to the wheel, and the word cabin is completely inappropriate here. These were full-fledged carriages, comparable in size to buses or trams of that time. Each such carriage held 60 people, 40 seated and 20 standing. Through simple math, we get the total capacity of the attraction. 2,160 people could be lifted into the air simultaneously. Think about this number. 2,000 people suspended on a single axis, rotating with perfect smoothness. Now let's look at the achievement of 1995. The modern wheel in the same Chicago has a diameter almost 2 times smaller, about 45 meters. But the catastrophe lies in the capacity. It is designed for only 240 passengers. 6 people in a small plastic capsule versus 60 in a spacious carriage with velvet seats and windows. Over 100 years of progress, performance has dropped almost tenfold. This is not just a step back. It is a rapid fall into the abyss of technological impotence. Why did this happen? They will tell us about safety, about new standards. But the Ferris wheel of 1893 withstood hurricane winds that blew roofs off neighboring buildings and didn't even budge. Its axle was the largest single piece of forged steel ever created at that time. It was a triumph of heavy industry. Today's structures are designed right to the limit, with a minimal safety margin, to save materials. We have forgotten how to create things with a colossal margin of reliability. Ferris's carriages were the size of a small apartment where banquets could be held. Modern gondolas only cause a bout of claustrophobia. This example with the Ferris wheel is just the tip of the iceberg. It clearly demonstrates that the concept of scale meant something completely different to our ancestors than it does to us. They thought in categories of thousands of tons and centuries of operation. We think in categories of plastic and a 5-year warranty period. If in the 19th century they could effortlessly lift 2,000 people into the sky on a single structure, it is scary to imagine what other technologies were available to them and what opportunities we lost by agreeing to ersatz progress. Giant steel wheels and complex mechanics are certainly impressive. But any machine is dead without a source of energy. And here we come to the grandest deception of modern times. We are led to believe that the internal combustion engine was the unrivaled king of the past, and electric cars are the latest invention of geniuses from Silicon Valley. But the facts speak to the contrary. Elon Musk actually invented nothing. He merely revived what was the norm long before he was born. The era of electric cars arrived and flourished when, according to our ideas, people should have been driving exclusively on horses. The greatest marketing trick of the 21st century lies in the conviction that the electric car is an innovation born in the Silicon Valleys of modernity, an answer to the ecological challenges of the new millennium. We are sold the idea that humanity, having finally realized the harmfulness of burning hydrocarbons, made a technological breakthrough and created the transport of the future. The name Elon Musk has become synonymous with this breakthrough. However, if you blow the dust off archival documents and technical handbooks from the beginning of the last century, it becomes obvious that we are dealing not with an invention, but with a large-scale historical reconstruction. The era of electricity arrived long before us, and it was stolen to make way for technologies that were dirtier, noisier, but more profitable for oil tycoons. Let's mentally transport ourselves to New York or London around the year 1900. The streets of these metropolises were not at all filled exclusively with smoking carts or horses leaving manure on the pavement. On the contrary, elegant horseless carriages driven by electric traction glided silently along the avenues. These were not experimental models for eccentric rich people. It was mass, reliable, and incredibly popular transport. Statistics from those years are relentless. At the dawn of the automotive industry, electric cars occupied a huge market share, significantly outpacing gasoline counterparts, which at that time were considered unreliable, loud, and dangerous toys requiring physical strength to start the engine with a crank. The electric car was the embodiment of comfort. Sit down, press the pedal, and drive in silence. The infrastructure for these cars was developed to an amazing level. What is presented today as the latest development, a network of charging stations, existed even then. In the cities, there were special booths resembling small, neat huts or transformer substations. The refueling process was ridiculously simple and did not require complex apps or authorizations. The driver simply connected his cab to the system, where massive switches and analog sensors controlled the current flow. Moreover, even then there were services for quick battery replacement, which solved the problem of long waiting times for a charge, a concept that modern auto giants are returning to only now, more than 100 years later. The scale of commercial use of electric transport is particularly impressive. In London and New York, entire taxi fleets operated consisting exclusively of electric cars. Uniformed drivers operated these machines, transporting thousands of passengers daily. There were even large electric sightseeing buses. Imagine an open, multi-seat bus from the early 20th century, taking tourists to sights without emitting clouds of black smoke or drowning out the guide's voice with the roar of a motor. This was a reality we lost. Why did we take a wrong turn? Why did humanity abandon clean and quiet transport in favor of internal combustion engines? Official history nods at Henry Ford and his assembly line, which made gasoline cars cheaper. But there is another point of view. The oil lobby simply destroyed the competitor, imposing an addiction to black gold on the world. Electric technologies did not disappear because they were imperfect. They were pushed out because they were too good and autonomous, but less profitable for those who wanted to sell fuel for decades. We haven't invented anything new. We are just painfully returning to the point where we were forcibly knocked off the path of progress. The realization that 100 years ago, cities could be clean and quiet causes bitterness. But electricity, for all its efficiency in the past, still fits within the framework of our understanding of physics. We know Ohm's law. We understand the principles of motors. However, museums and private collections hold objects whose very existence challenges not just the history of technology, but the fundamental laws of materials science. There are artifacts created using technologies that we consider impossible even today. For example, the joining of metals that, according to all physics and chemistry textbooks, cannot be joined in principle. Electricity, for all its efficiency in the early 20th century, still fits within the framework of our understanding of school physics. We know Ohm's law. We understand the principles of motors. And although the scale of electric car use in the past is astounding, it does not violate the fundamental laws of nature. However, museums and private collections contain objects whose very existence challenges not just the history of technology, but the basics of material science. There are artifacts created using technologies that we consider impossible even today. We are talking about things that physically should not exist if we believe the official chronology of the development of metallurgy. One of the most mysterious and inexplicable objects is the so-called Slavic cup, presented at the World's Fair in Chicago in 1893. At first glance, it is simply a beautiful item, but any professional welder or metallurgist, upon learning of its composition, will be bewildered. This cup represents a sample of welding 8 different ferrous and non-ferrous metals, which, according to all canons of modern science, are considered unjoinable or extremely difficult to combine. Bronze, nickel, steel, copper, cast iron, bell bronze, and other alloys were fused into a single monolithic structure. The problem is that these materials have completely different melting points, different coefficients of thermal expansion, and chemical properties. An attempt to weld them together using ordinary methods would lead either to the destruction of the structure upon cooling, or to the formation of brittle, unreliable seams. However, the Slavic cup demonstrates a perfect connection. The seams are so thin and neat that they are almost impossible to notice with the naked eye. This is not just soldering, it is diffusion at the molecular level. In 1893, this artifact received a gold medal with the wording, "For a produced technical revolution." Engineers back then understood that they were looking at a miracle. Today, even a 6th grade welder with modern laser or plasma equipment is unlikely to be able to repeat such a thing with the same elegance and reliability. The secret of this technology was lost or intentionally forgotten, and we were left with primitive welding methods that are not fit to hold a candle to the craftsmanship of the 19th century. But if the cup demonstrates miracles at the micro level, then the next artifact amazes with its gigantism and power. Let's transport ourselves to Paris in 1900, to the famous Street of the Future. Engineers of that time created and successfully operated an electric moving sidewalk. This was not a short path like in modern airports, but a full-fledged transport artery 3.5 kilometers long. The structure was mounted on a viaduct 7 meters high and encircled the exhibition. The sidewalk had 3 lanes, 1 stationary and 2 moving at different speeds. The high-speed belt allowed one to go around the entire exhibition in 26 minutes, moving at a speed of about 8 kilometers per hour. It would seem like a little, but let's evaluate the scale. At the same time, 14,000 people could be on this moving canvas. And on peak days, for example on Easter, a record was set: 70,000 passengers. Imagine this colossal mass: 70,000 people, plus the weight of the steel structure itself, plus the mechanisms. These are thousands of tons that needed to be smoothly moved and kept in constant motion. What incredible drive power was required for this? What mechanical reliability had to be built in so that the system would not crumble under such a load? And most importantly, it worked. People perceived it as commonplace, as convenient urban transport. American engineers created similar systems for Chicago as well. It was a solution to the problem of traffic jams. An eco-friendly and effective way to move huge masses of people. But after the exhibitions, these technologies seemed to evaporate. The sidewalks were dismantled. The blueprints were put away in archives. And the unique engines capable of pulling entire cities disappeared without a trace. Instead of developing the idea of moving streets, we got gas-polluted avenues and cramped subway cars. Looking at the impossible welding and giant conveyors for people, one involuntarily asks the question, where did this knowledge disappear to? Why don't we use it now when it is so needed? Why are we told that dark people lived in the past if they knew how to do things we couldn't even dream of? All these facts gathered together lead to one disappointing and frightening conclusion. It seems that the progress we are so proud of is just a beautiful illusion, a screen hiding the truth about our real situation from us. All these seemingly scattered facts, from strange coins with flying machines to lost technologies of giant Ferris wheels and impossible welding, add up to a single, frightening mosaic. If we take a step back and look at the big picture of our so-called development, it becomes obvious that we are not at the peak of evolution, but possibly in a deep technological stagnation, masquerading as progress. We are used to thinking that every next decade brings breakthroughs, but let's be honest. The fundamental technologies on which our civilization rests have not changed for more than half a century, or even longer. We are merely polishing old inventions, adding touchscreens and beautiful packaging to them. Look at the space industry. Rocket engines, which today launch satellites and ships into orbit, are essentially developments from the mid-20th century. We are still flying on kerosene barrels, the principles of which were laid down back in the 50s. The global internet, without which we cannot imagine life, was born as a military development in the 60s. All microelectronics, transistors, and computing system architecture are the legacy of the middle of the last century. Even internal combustion engines, which we consider the basis of transport, were invented in the 19th century. Over 100+ years, we have only slightly increased their efficiency, but the principle remains the same. We burn fuel to get movement. Where are the gravitational engines? Where are the new principles of energy generation? They are not there. We are treading water, exploiting the ideas of our great-grandfathers. The saddest proof of our degradation is the change in the very approach to creation. Previously, as we have seen with examples of architecture and engineering, it was economically feasible to build for centuries. It was profitable to create beauty, to decorate ordinary residential houses with molding, statues, and complex engineering systems. Technologies allowed this to be done en masse. Today we are told that it is too expensive. But why? If we have become richer and more technologically advanced, why can't we afford what was the norm for our ancestors? The answer is simple. We have gone down the path of simplification. The modern economy is tailored not for quality and durability, but for rapid turnover and disposability. We build from cheap materials so that in 50 years we can tear it down and build anew. This is not development. It is primitivization for the sake of momentary profit. We have lost the secrets of craftsmanship, replacing them with assembly line stamping of faceless products. This theory of a technological dead end forces us to reconsider everything we were taught in school. We are told that people in the past lived hard lives and built great structures for years, exhausted by unbearable labor. But looking at the perfect masonry, impossible welding, and giant mechanisms of the past, the feeling arises that this is a lie. Perhaps they had tools and energy sources that we have forgotten. Maybe brick factories worked on scales that even the Soviet Union at the peak of industrialization did not dream of. We see only the remnants of past greatness and call them historical heritage, although in reality, they may be the ruins of a more advanced civilization, on the foundation of which we have built our shaky decorations. Therefore, I urge you not to take a single word from official textbooks on faith without checking it yourself. History is written by the victors, and often inconvenient facts that do not fit into the neat theory of linear progress are erased from it. Exercise common sense. Look for information in primary sources. Study old photographs and blueprints. The world around us is full of mysteries that lie on the surface. You just need to open your eyes and stop believing the fairy tale that we are the pinnacle of creation. If these findings and facts forced your brain to work in a new mode, if you felt that reality is more complex than it seems, be sure to like this material. This is the best way to show that the topic interests you. Write in the comments which technology of the past surprised you the most. Impossible welding, electric sidewalks, or perhaps UFOs on ancient coins. Your opinion is important to us. And of course, subscribe to the channel so as not to miss the next investigations. We will continue to dig up the truth together with you. See you in the world of real history.